not now my literature class.
Yeah, see, that's what, see, I've read, if you've read, Middle English and Shakespeare and Chaucer and those, say it comes back to you and what words mean and, so.
That's why I watch
have to
with
sit there
my
and look.
son, Jeopardy. There are some, literature.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
well,
I said, I've read that. I read that. I said, I don't remember ever reading it in, I was at school.
Yeah, some of those stuff me. I was always amazed
Come in,
at
Gail.
what my mother had
Yes.
read. I just,
You don't have any refills.
it
No.
was amazing. Well, of course, seeing your mom, now Doris was an avid reader, and she was fast. My God, she would borrow a book, and then she was done.
I read it.
Yeah.
Another one.
Yeah.
My
know,
oldest
and-
son read a lot.
Wow.
He had read a
She
lot.
could consume.
Any other
books.
regulars out there?
No, I haven't seen.
Didn't see it.
Ron, Tom.
I thought Tom is
I
in
was-
Colorado.
Oh,
Yeah,
is
I
that
don't
where
know how
they
long
are?
they're gonna be coming.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Tom is in
These
Colorado.
retirees on the run.
That's right, Can't
Okay.
kill them down.
Well, let's,
Well, I did see Joanne. I don't know, was she gonna continue to come? She was there, she was here.
no, she hasn't been
Yeah,
coming to
she-
this.
yeah.
Vicki Williams?
No, I did not see Vicky.
Okay.
Dennis, we didn't see Dennis.
Yeah, because I mentioned it to her son. Anyway, let's,
Okay.
we'll pray and get started then.
Okay.
Lord, we thank you for our time together, and I pray that you'll help us to understand your ways better. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we're halfway through, Gail, so I cannot catch you up. But I think, though, that it's, I think this will be, this kind of, some of this stuff kind of stands alone, so it's, we don't necessarily have to go back over it. So what I do is I'll read a little bit and then try to explain it.
Sounds good to me.
And it's, some of it needs some explaining. So he has 2 chapters on human pain, which we'll try to get through tonight, but if we don't, that's fine. We'll pick it up next week because the next chapter is fairly short. It's about hell. So, I have tried to show in a previous chapter that the possibility of pain is inherent in the very existence of a world where souls can meet. I said the idea of if I'm walking down the hill, you might be walking up the hill. So there's going to be inconveniences and just because of the world we live in. When souls become wicked, they will certainly use this possibility to hurt one another, and this perhaps accounts for 4/5 of the suffering of men. It is men, not God, who produce racks, whips, prisons, slavery, guns, bayonets, and bombs. It is by human avarice or human stupidity, not by the churlishness of nature, that we have poverty and overwork. So a lot of this we bring upon each other. But there remains nonetheless much suffering which cannot be traced to ourselves. To say, as was said in the last chapter, that good for such creatures as we now are means primarily corrective or remedial good. Okay, so that's one of his premises, is that the pain we suffer can be God's corrective action. Think about the prodigal son. Life was pretty good. He takes his inheritance, runs away. But what was it that caused him to change his mind?
His body.
He was in pain.
Yes.
Yeah. He
Was
was
hungry.
slowly starving.
I saw this, I think it was a Twilight Zone or an Outer Limits, and aliens came. They said, y'all were killing each other off, now you've gone into space, and we just think we need to put an end to all this. You're a danger to the rest of the universe.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, so then he talks about pain, the 2 senses of pain. And the first one is like physical pain. And, you know, like if I sit in these chairs for an hour, I've got a certain amount of pain because they're pretty uncomfortable. But as long as it doesn't get above a certain threshold, then, you know, it's manageable. So then he talks about pain in the second sense. Any experience, whether physical or mental, which the patient dislikes, it will be noticed that all pains in sense A become pains in sense B if they are raised to a certain level. Like if I had to sit in that chair for 2 hours. But that pains in the B sense need not be pains in the A sense. Pains in the B sense, in fact, is synonymous with suffering, anguish, tribulation, adversity, or trouble. So this could be, you know, all manner of things. You know, she done me wrong. Now, the proper good of a creature is to surrender itself to its creator. Okay, now we have seen this in previous chapters, that this business of surrendering our will to God. To enact intellectually, volitionally, and emotionally that relationship which is given to the mere fact of it being a creature. When it does so, it is good and happy. So Lewis gives us the formula there for living the good life and being happy, and that's to surrender ourselves to God. The necessity to die daily, however often we think we have broken the rebellious self, we shall find it still alive. So, and I suspect, you know, each of us have had this experience to some extent where, you know, you go through some trouble and okay, and you get, you know, you're going to get right, and then the pendulum swings the other way. We'll see more of that later.
There's Ron.
Yeah, he's good.
Sneaking in the back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Ron, come on in. So now we're talking about mortification, and mortification, the idea is that's, you know, dying to self sort of thing. So mortification, though itself a pain, is made easier by the presence of pain in its context. This happens, I think, principally in 3 ways. So first thing is, the human spirit will not even begin to try to surrender self-will as long as it seems to be well with it. So if your life is pretty good, you don't need God.
So many people think that.
And that's
Until they get in a difficult situation, then, you know.
and that's
then
right.
mention
That's so much of what we see in this book here. And you know, you just think about you know, easier for a rich man to get into heaven than a camel to get through the eye of the needle. You know, because the rich man, he's got everything he needs. Pain is unmasked, unmistakable evil. Every man knows that something is wrong when he is being hurt. Okay? If you're experiencing some sort of pain, you know something's wrong. Now here's this next paragraph is like one of the big takeaways from this book. And pain is not only immediately recognizable evil, but evil impossible to ignore. We can rest contentedly in our sins and in our stupidities, and anyone who has watched gluttons shoveling down the most exquisite foods as if they did not know what they were eating will admit that we can ignore even pleasure. Pain insists on being attended to. Here it is. God whispers to us in our pleasures. So, you know, you like watching sunrises, sunsets, you like your hobbies, you play with your grandkids. You know, God's whispering to us in these pleasures that he sends our way. He speaks to us in our conscience. So, you know, the sermon hits us, You know, that's our conscience. Okay, that's something's amiss here. But shouts to us in our pain. So when you know, God's shouting to us in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Okay, so this is another big theme of this book, is that, you know, pain comes our way and God can have a purpose to it. Okay. No doubt pain as God's megaphone is a terrible instrument. It may lead to final and unrepented rebellion. Okay, most of us were here for the Great Divorce, and a quick summary of the Great Divorce. These people came up from hell, and they had one more. It's a fiction, okay? So they had one more chance to get into heaven, and so someone they knew would, hey, come on in. It's going to be okay, and well, I don't want to because of this. Well, but it's going to be great. Just come on. Tomorrow it'll all be better, and just better and better and better. And most of the characters in the book refused. Nope, I'm going back, because God wouldn't meet them on their terms, but he demanded that they meet him on his terms. Anyway, so that's the example of final and unrepented rebellion, rebellious to the end. But it gives the only opportunity the bad man can have for amendment. So Lewis is saying that, you know, when pain comes upon someone, he's calling them. And again, just think about the prodigal son. You know, he was going to do things his way, and then he got hungry, and he was mistreated, and life is bad, I'm going home. It removes the veil. It plants the flag of truth within the fortress of the rebel soul. If the first and lowest operation of pain shatters the illusion that all is well, again, the prodigal son, okay, he understood all was not well when he was feeding the pigs. The second shatters the illusion that what we have, whether good or bad in itself, is our own and enough for us. So, you know, we tend to have things and collect things and buy things and hoard things, etc., etc. And so that becomes an important part of our world.
And then we forget about it. So, oh, I didn't know I had it.
Then he quotes St. Augustine. God wants to give us something, but cannot because our hands are full. There's nowhere for him to put it. So see, we can be, you know, our material prosperity, which we certainly enjoy in the U.S., can become a barrier to our spiritual life. While what we call our own life remains agreeable, we will not surrender it to him. And that's just the way we are.
Like the rich man, just give all your stuff away.
Yeah,
Follow me.
yeah.
Oh, gee.
Time out.
Yeah, right.
I don't do that.
Oh, yeah, old phone.
How about just part of it? That's what.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna take one step back from this prosperity that we just looked at. We are perplexed to see misfortune falling upon decent, inoffensive, worthy people. And, you know, we've all watched that, or you know, it's happened to us. We're just going about our business, and suddenly calamity hits, and, you know, why me? And here's Lewis gives a possible explanation. He, speaking of God, thinks that their modest prosperity and the happiness of their children are not enough to make them blessed. You know, I'm pretty content with what I have, but, you know, God might have more for us. That all this must fall away from them in the end, and certainly with death, everything falls away. and that if they have not learned to know him, they will be wretched. So again, it's the idea that the stuff we have, and even the good stuff, family or whatever, can be an obstacle. And therefore he troubles them, warning them in advance of an insufficiency that one day they will have to discover. The life to themselves and their families stands between them and the recognition of their need. So again, we're kind of backed off from prosperity, wealth, to just living a good life, and even that can be a barrier between us and God. He makes that life less sweet to them. I call this divine humility because it is a poor thing to strike our colors to God when the ship is going down under us. Okay, so I'll give you a nautical reference here. So think back to the age of sail where the ships would get close to each other and shoot their guns and, like master and commander. So if your ship is sunk so far that you're ankle deep in water and then you surrender, you haven't really surrendered. You've been defeated. So that's the image here. A poor thing to come to him as a last resort, to offer up our own when it is no longer worth keeping. Your ship has sunk, and now you're going to surrender. If God were proud, he would hardly have us on such terms. But he is not proud. He stoops to conquer. He will have us even though we have shown that we prefer everything else to him, and come to him because there is nothing better now to be had. So see, you have the image here of someone who's really brought low, because that's how God is trying to call them. And I think, I've certainly not had this, I guess, as extreme experience, but I think we've all probably had this. The creature's illusion of self-sufficiency must, for the creature's sake, be shattered, and by trouble or fear of trouble on earth, by crude fear of eternal flames, God shatters it, unmindful of his glory's diminution. So this can happen, that an individual's world just falls apart, and it may be that this is how God's trying to reconcile him to himself. He gives an example. Prostitutes are in no danger of finding their present life so satisfactory that they cannot turn to God. The proud, the avaricious, the self-righteous are in that danger. So if someone's got a miserable life, they're more likely to turn to God than the guy that's prosperous. Okay, so and then he has a third example of how this suffering can affect us. The full acting out of the self-surrender to God therefore demands pain. This action, to be perfect, must be done from the pure will to obey, in the absence of inclination. So he's given us the idea here that becoming submissive to God will involve some pain. Okay, so I have an example. We studied screw tape letters a while back, and the way screw tape letters are written, it's fiction. And so it's a senior tempter sending letters to a junior tempter. So this is communication between devils. Okay, but there's a lot of good truth in there. So the context of this is one tempter to another giving him advice. so this is early in the book where the patient has recently become a Christian. Sooner or later he withdraws, speaking of God withdraws his presence from the person. If not in fact, at least from their conscious experience. He leaves the creature to stand up on its own legs, to carry out from the will alone duties which have lost all relish. Hence the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him the best. He wants them to learn to walk and must therefore take away his hand, and if only the will to walk is there, he is pleased even with their stumbles. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring, but still intending to do our enemy's will, enemy being God, looks around upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, asks why he has been forsaken, and still obeys. So here's a Christian going through life, and he doesn't feel God's presence anymore, and he can't see God, but he's still okay. I'm still going to obey and carry on. So there's a picture of some suffering there on the part of the individual. We therefore agree with Aristotle that what is intrinsically right may well be agreeable. Okay, so referring to Aristotle, the philosopher from way back. So I'm taking his word for it that Aristotle says that, it can be agreeable to do the right thing. It can be. It's not always hard. And that the better a man is, the more he will like it. So as we improve ourselves, it's easier to make right choices, etc. But we agree with Kant as far as to say that there is one right act, that of self-surrender. So we're back to self-surrender again, which cannot be willed to the height by fallen creatures unless it is unpleasant. So I guess the way I interpret this is that as we go through our lives and as we seek to surrender ourselves to God, to do his will, to be open to his leading, it's hard to do that. And it will be hard to do that. So this kind of runs contrary to the prosperity folks, who promote the idea that, if you do things just right, everything will be easy. So, remember Abraham and Isaac, right? God's told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac as an offering. So he puts up a hypothetical question. If God is omniscient, that is, if God knows everything, he must have known that what Abraham would do without any experiment. If God has the knowledge of things, well, he would know that Abraham would pass the test. So why put Abraham through it?
Because Abraham needed to know that.
Exactly.
Which
Which is, yeah, see, it was
for Abraham, not for God.
That's right. So, but again, there's a picture of suffering. He gets ordered to sacrifice his son. Now there's some anguish there.
Yeah, he, all the way to Mount Moriah, while he was walking up there with, he was agonizing.
Oh, yeah.
You promised me, Lord, that I will be a father of many nations,
Yep.
that through me, a seed will come.
Yeah.
He was agonizing all the way.
Absolutely. But that was, but this is how Abraham could find out more about himself. The sacrifice of Christ is repeated or re-echoed among his followers in very varying degrees, from the cruelest martyrdom down to a self-submission of intention, whose outward signs have nothing to distinguish them from the ordinary fruits of temperance and sweet reasonableness. So the task God gives to us, could be as severe as martyrdom, but then other things, well, that's not so hard. I am not arguing that pain is not painful. Pain hurts.
It's smart, yeah.
That is what the word means. I'm only trying to show that the old Christian doctrine of being made perfect through suffering is not incredible, and refers to Hebrews 2:10, that we're made perfect through suffering. And
Must be getting close.
well, but again, I mean, when we have a group of people in our age bracket, this is not a surprise. If we were talking to teenagers, I'm not sure they would necessarily understand it the way we might. Yeah. And as a teenager, I sure would not want to hear something like that.
Yeah. Got some good news, got some bad news.
You're going to be more perfect later.
But it's gonna hurt.
Okay, well, I've got a bit of a long reading here, so my own experience is something like this. I am progressing along the path of life in my ordinary, contentedly fallen and godless condition, absorbed in a merry meeting with my friends for the morrow, or a bit of work that tickles my vanity today, a holiday or a new book, when suddenly a stab of abdominal pain that threatens serious disease, or a headline in the newspaper that threatens us all with destruction, sends this whole pack of cards tumbling down. And we've all had days like this. At first, I'm overwhelmed, and all my little happinesses look like broken toys. Then slowly and reluctantly, bit by bit, I try to bring myself into the frame of mind that I should be in at all times. I remind myself that all these toys were never intended to possess my heart. Now there's a temptation, right? That our hobbies or whatever. That my true good is in another world, and my only real treasure is Christ. And perhaps by God's grace, I succeed for a day or two, become a creature consciously dependent on God and drawing its strength from the right sources. Think back to September 11th, 2001.
What's California now suffering? They have to turn off their air conditioner because they don't have enough energy.
California, I don't live there anymore.
Not to use the dishwasher, not to do laundry,
And don't plug your electric car until after
Yes.
sundown.
But the moment the threat is withdrawn, my whole nature leaps back to the toys. I am even anxious. God forgive me to banish from my mind the only thing that supported me under the threat, because it is now associated with the misery of those few days. Thus the terrible necessity of tribulation is only too clear. God has had me for but 48 hours, and then only by dint of taking everything else away from me. Let him but sheathe the sword for a moment, and I behave like a puppy when the hated bath is over. I shake myself as dry as I can and race off to reacquire my comfortable dirtiness, if not in the nearest manure pile, at least in the nearest flower bed. And that is why tribulations cannot cease until either God sees us remade or sees that our remaking is now hopeless. No, there's a.
Yeah, I'm scared, yeah.
But I mean, again, we've all been through this. We should live dependent on God. Give us this day our daily bread. I mean, that's the nature of our dependence. But especially in a prosperous world like we live in, we come to depend on other stuff more. I have seen great beauty of spirit in some who were great sufferers. I have seen men for the most part grow better, not worse, with advancing years, and have seen the last illness produce treasures of fortitude and meekness from most unpromising subjects. So he's just given a kind of a hypothetical example here. Maybe somebody he knew that advanced in years. Maybe you saw this working at the nursing home, that they, as their condition got worse, they became more dependent on God. If the world is indeed a veil of soul making, it seems on the whole to be doing its job. Again, the veil of soul making apparently is from some poem, and the veil, V-A-L-E, of soul making is like a valley of soul making. So we're walking through a valley of the shadow of death. So he ends the chapter with this: the Marxist thus finds himself in real agreement with the Christian in these two beliefs, which Christianity paradoxically demands: that poverty is blessed and yet ought to be removed. And that's how he starts the second chapter on human pain. There is a paradox about tribulation in Christianity. Blessed are the poor, but we are to remove poverty wherever possible. So that's interesting, right? Mm-hmm. So if it's blessed to be poor, why don't I just make myself poor? Well, one reason is that maybe I can help someone who's more poorer than me.
Or you can appreciate whatever, something land in your hand, you'll appreciate it.
Yeah. But if suffering is good, ought it not be to be pursued rather than avoided? I answer that suffering is not good in itself. Okay, simply suffering is not a good in itself. He keeps referring to us being in a suffering in some form to draw us closer to himself.
But is it not some, group of people, that's why they remove themselves away from civilization, they really do their food, hard work.
The Amish people. Like them?
Worse than that, like the sect, like Buddhist, where they go to the mountain,
Okay, yeah.
Become a monk.
A monk.
Privation. Yeah.
They really work hard for their food, and they,
Yeah. Simple life. What is good in any painful experience is, for the sufferer, his submission to the will of God. Okay, so that's what he ought to do if he's suffering in whatever context. Submit to God's will. For the rest of us, for the spectators, the compassion aroused and the acts of mercy to which it leads, that's what should happen. It's an opportunity for us to be charitable. Now he has 4 points here, which are really, really very good. So put this in the context of somebody who's unfortunate, some bad circumstance, and somebody gives them some help. So that is, one is simple good that descends from God. Okay, we see someone in need and we try to help that need. The second is, there is simple evil produced by rebellious creatures. Okay? Well, let's think about the prodigal son. You know, I want my money, I'm leaving. Okay, that was a bad thing to do. You know, he turned his back on his father and went his way. Third one is the exploitation of that evil by God for his redemptive purposes. So even when people act badly and rebel, God can still use that for his purposes. I see one nodding head. And then the fourth thing he comes up with is the complex good to which accepted and suffering and repented sin contribute. And then he expands on this a little bit, okay? But the key term here is this complex good, and I think maybe you'll identify with this. The crucifixion itself is the best as well as the worst of all historical events, and that's, you know, we believe that. But the role of Judas remains simply evil. You know, Judas doesn't get a pass. A merciful man aims at his neighbor's good, and so does God's will. Okay, you contribute to the food bank. He is consciously cooperating with the simple good. Okay? A cruel man oppresses his neighbor, and so does simple evil. And we're aware of this sort of thing. But in doing such evil, he is used by God without his own knowledge or consent to produce the complex good, so that the first man serves God as a son, and the second as a tool. So you remember Romans 8:28, all things work together for good. So even when misfortune comes our way, maybe at the direct hand of some other person, that's not the end of the story, because God is sovereign over these things. For you will certainly carry out God's purpose however you act. But it makes a difference to you whether you serve like Judas or like John. Okay? So I think the gist there is that, you know, God's will be done. It will happen. And his hand is at work in this world. And we can participate with him by, you know, acts of charity, for example. And but even when people, you know, bad things come our way.
But God knows already how Judas will react. I mean, he was more, you know, tempted for the money, you know. Oh, I can get hold of that money.
But he still,
after being, you know, after he had the money, he, you know, he said, "Can I do this? Is a dirty money," and just throw back to the priest.
So the first point he's talking about here is this complex good that God is working all the time, and
You know, I've always thought, because we have all the time in the world, literally, when we get to heaven,
yeah.
and we'll find out, you know, why did this thing happen? And you'll be able to look, oh, that's what happened because of that.
Yeah. And you know, I can look back at things, you know, I thought, boy, this is not working out the way I wanted it to, and I had these plans, it didn't happen. And then I found out after the fact, well, it was a good thing that didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, even, you know, what we think are good solid plans they get thwarted, and then sometimes we find out that, well, it was just as well that my plan
You
didn't
were late,
work.
the reason you were late, you missed this accident.
That's right, yeah. I think those things happen all the time, and we just don't even know it. Now, we're still in this first point that he's making about this complex good, and the idea of blessed are the poor, but he's not advocating being poor, because if we're not poor, then we can help someone who is. And so this section continues. Everyone knows that fasting is a different experience from missing your dinner by accident or through poverty. Now, I don't practice fasting.
You can look at me and go,
Fasting asserts the will against the appetite. Okay, so I mean that was part of fasting. Okay, I am going to, my will overcome a certain bodily function. The reward being self-mastery. Self-mastery is a good thing. And then he points out that the danger is pride. You know,
That's how the Pharisees,
That's right.
Yeah.
did.
So even these good things can lead us, if we don't do them correctly, can lead down another path. Involuntary hunger subjects appetite and will together to the divine will, furnishing an occasion for submission and exposing us to the danger of rebellion. So if we miss a meal for some other reason, well, then we might be unhappy with God or something. But the redemptive effect of suffering lies chiefly in its tendency to reduce the rebel will. And again, I mean, this is what he keeps referring over and over again to our submissiveness to God. In order to submit the will to God, we must have a will, and that will must have objects. I want Taco Tuesday. Christian renunciation, a readiness to prefer God to inferior ends which are in themselves lawful. So he kind of jumps to another item here where even when we have good things to choose from, I'm going to choose to do this, but nothing wrong with doing that. But if we're choosing that when we ought to choose something better, then that can be a problem too. Choosing something good instead of the best. Okay, so we'll hit a couple more of these. I don't think we can finish it, but that's fine. Okay, the second item, a Christian cannot therefore believe any of those who promise that if only some reform in our economic, political, or hygienic system were made, a heaven on earth would follow. Okay, so this is one aspect of this is that we cannot have, there is no utopia. So Marx's ideas and stuff like that, just are not going to happen, because it can't happen, and they're deluded when they think it's going to happen. And
Not in this world.
Yeah.
right, because there's something better.
Doesn't mean that we don't strive to make things better. I mean,
Yes.
this is the whole thing between politics. It's each one thinks that we can achieve by doing something different, but it doesn't matter who gets the upper hand. It never comes out exactly right.
I read this book a few years ago, and it was written by some guy. Anyway, he runs this think tank called the American Enterprise Institute. And the title of the book is Who Really Cares? And so we kind of, it's sort of a statistical thing.
Yeah.
Well, like, for example, you know, being generous and giving, well, church folks give more than non-church folks. And I think some of these I remember correctly. People in the South give more than people in the North. You know, the politically conservative give more than the politically liberal. And, but one of the points he makes in the book is that a problem in our modern world is that as like these government programs have become more and more generous, we as generous people, well, they're already taxing me to support these people and those people and, you know, for this
It
benefit
doesn't
and that
promote-
benefit.
I mean, it promotes on those that are recipient laziness. They don't, you know, want to do anything, you know.
Oh yeah, right, and that's a moral hazard there, but as one of his observations is that as the government does more of what we could call charitable work,
It's bad.
We do less.
we do less
Uh-huh.
because we're sort of induced that way. Okay, well that's a pretty good stopping point. So there's just a few more points to cover, you know, along the same lines of these first two, where he just has these kind of disconnected items. So I'll move my marker. Yeah, we're just a few pages from the end. So come back next week for.
And that will be the last.
No. We've got to go to hell next week.
Yeah, next week.
I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Next week we have hell. The week after that is animal pain.
Oh,
So
so
he's
two. I thought you.
no. We have 3 more sessions.
Okay.
So animal pain. It's a good point, because if human pain is to cause us to be more responsive to God, then why do animals have pain? Because anyway, it's an interesting thought to pursue, and then we end up in heaven. So
That's a good thing.
that's
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
As long as that's the end of the
There will be
story.
no more pain here. He just want to let us experience here because we won't experience it over there.
yeah. Okay, well, appreciate y'all coming. Lord, we thank you for our time together, and Lord, I pray that you will help us to meditate on these things and to incorporate them into our lives, and Lord, help us to respond to you as we should, as you bring different things into our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Oh, Linda and Larry. Linda and Larry.
Oh, yeah, don't worry. There's a couple of receipts for you.
Oh, okay.